At 6 a.m. on August 11th, everything changed in the Ukraine war. In just a matter of hours, the unthinkable happened. Small, ghost-like Russian groups crossed 17 kilometers of defended territory, as if the Ukrainian lines simply didn't exist. Right now, as you're watching this video, a town you've probably never even heard of is deciding the fate of millions of Ukrainians who've fallen under Vladimir Putin's control. If it falls within the next 48 hours, the entire resistance in eastern Ukraine could collapse like dominoes. A single road, a single railway station, a single spot on the map that, if lost, could change everything. And now, for the first time, I'm going to show you how a battle nobody's even talking about might actually be the most important one of 2025. Stick with me, because what you're about to find out over the next few minutes is going to completely change the way you understand this Russian-Ukrainian conflict. To understand how important what's happening in Pokrovsk really is, picture the circulatory system of the human body. Pokrovsk is the heart of that network, pumping supplies through asphalt arteries and steel rails into cities like Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, and Kostiantynivka. Since August 11, 2025, Russian forces have launched a coordinated ground offensive called the Dobrapilya Offensive, marking a new stage of pressure on this crucial logistics hub. The goal wasn't necessarily to grab territory fast, but to choke the supply routes that keep the Ukrainian resistance alive. The Russian strategy shifted. Instead of frontal attacks, they went for surgical infiltrations cutting into the nerves of Ukraine's defense system. Highways T0515, connecting Pokrovsk to Dobrapilya, and T0514, linking Dobrapilya to the key cities of Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, became priority targets. They don't need to destroy them completely, just make them dangerous enough to disrupt the constant flow of fuel, ammo, medical gear, and troop rotations. Pokrovsk works like a unique military distribution hub in the region. Before the war, it was just a quiet mining town, but now it holds one of the last functioning railway stations still within Ukraine's reach in the Donetsk sector. Pokrovsk's train station has 2 classification yards, dozens of tracks, and transfer points, making it the nervous system of the entire logistics backbone in the rear. Through these rails, whole units are rotated, equipment gets repaired, and critical supplies, especially ammo and fuel, reach the forward positions. What makes Pokrovsk truly irreplaceable is its geography. Sitting at the intersection of multiple supply roads, the city naturally funnels everything that needs to reach the northern part of Donetsk. Losing Pokrovsk would be like ripping out a heart valve. The blood would still flow, but way less efficiently. For Ukraine, keeping Pokrovsk running is a matter of operational survival. For Russia, taking it would be one of the biggest territorial wins since the fall of Avdiivka back in February 2024. The offensive that kicked off on August 11th didn't follow the usual pattern of heavy armor attacks. Instead, small dismounted infantry detachments slipped through gaps in Ukrainian lines, setting up footholds in different villages to bring in more reinforcements. The infiltration method was almost surgical. Groups of 8 to 12 soldiers moving through ditches, woods, and abandoned buildings, avoiding exposure to drones and artillery. Penetration points focused along the Kucherov Yar, Zoloty Koladayas, the Seal Axis, about 22 kilometers north and northeast of Dobrapilya. This wasn't random. The terrain there gives enough natural cover for small groups, but still allows access to the vital roads. The tactical goal was clear: create gray zones where territorial control stays disputed, making it way too risky for military and civilian convoys to move freely. Even without total control of a road, just the threat of ambushes is enough to throw the entire supply chain into chaos. Field reports showed that within hours, Russian forward observers had positioned themselves within visual range of the main supply routes. That let them call in drone-guided munitions and artillery on specific targets, multiplying the impact of the initial infiltration. Ukraine's reaction showed both preparation and urgency. Experienced reserves were rushed in for a 3-part response: containment, clearing, and stabilization. The first priority was urban clearing inside Pokrovsk itself, where infiltrators had slipped past the city's security perimeter. Specialized urban combat units were sent in for meticulous sweep operations, house by house, in the outer neighborhoods where enemy presence had been detected. This operation, even though it barely got any media coverage, was key to keeping the basic logistics hub functional. At the same time, localized counterattacks were launched to retake key terrain points nearby. The goal wasn't to reclaim huge swaths of territory, but to grab back high ground, road junctions, and landmarks that offered tactical advantage. Every 10-meter hill retaken meant extra kilometers of visibility and fire control. The Ukrainian strategy prioritized creating pincers, converging attacks on the flanks of the narrowest Russian bulges. Just like a snake that stretches too far becomes easy to cut in half, Russian advances that failed to widen enough turned into prime targets for encirclement and wipeout. It all started on the freezing dawn of August 11th. At 6 in the morning, while most of Pokrovsk's residents were still asleep, Russian assault groups were already breaking through defensive lines north of Dobropilya. This was the start of the so-called Dobropilya offensive, an operation that would push Ukraine's response capacity to the limit. 8 hours later, by 2 p.m. that same day, the reality of the situation started sinking in. Confirmations poured in one after another. Enemy presence confirmed in Kucherov Yar, suspicious movements nearby, evacuation routes compromised. That's when Ukrainian command realized this wasn't just a diversion. It was a real attempt to slice into the logistical jugular of Donbass. Emergency protocols were triggered right away. All routine operations were suspended. Reserves started mobilizing, and for the first time in months, Pokrovsk went into full alert. The early hours of August 12th brought the worst news. Highway T0515, the main artery linking Pokrovsk to Dobropilya, was under sporadic fire. Supply trucks that normally made the trip in 30 minutes now needed armed escorts, tripling travel time and creating critical bottlenecks in the supply chain. But that afternoon came the unthinkable. Infiltrators were spotted in Pokrovsk's very suburbs. The city that was supposed to be a safe rear sanctuary suddenly turned into an urban battlefield. Specialized units were deployed for door-to-door clearing operations, while civilians were told to stay in shelters. August 13th and 14th marked the turning point. Ukraine's counteroffensive wasn't some grand show of tanks and heavy artillery, it was a war of surgical precision. Small elite units began systematically biting into the sides of Russian bulges, forcing tactical withdrawals and retaking strategic positions in Zolotyi Kolodiyas. Between August 15th and 17th, something like stabilization emerged out of the chaos, but at a terrible cost for both sides. New defensive lines were set up, more compact and better coordinated, but the geography of the conflict had permanently shifted. What used to be a relatively stable front now turned into a complex web of bulges, pockets, and contested zones. Finally, by August 18th and 19th, military analysts could take a cooler look at things. The Russian advance had been contained, but not wiped out. Pressure on the supply routes stayed constant, turning every supply run into a calculated risk operation. Pokrovsk kept working, but its heartbeat had changed, faster, more irregular, more fragile. The land around Pokrovsk has unique features that explain both the successes and the limits for both sides. Open plains alternate with dense tree patches, natural ravines, and small villages acting as makeshift fortresses. For attackers, this geographical patchwork offers multiple approach routes and cover points. A skilled platoon can move kilometers through drainage ditches and forest belts without much aerial exposure. But that same geography that makes infiltration easier also creates deadly traps. Narrow bulges get exposed to crossfire from several directions. Villages seized quickly can become encircled if supply lines are cut. The average elevation in the region isn't high, but even a 5 to 15 meter height difference becomes extremely valuable. An observation post on a modest rise can visually dominate several square kilometers, deciding who gets to move by day and who's forced into night moves. Ukrainian forces learned how to use this topography defensively, setting up overlapping fields of fire that turn linear advances into death corridors. The spread of FPV drones made any unprotected movement across open ground even deadlier. Inside Pokrovsk, life adjusted to the relentless rhythm of military logistics. The railway station runs 24/7, with cargo trains arriving and leaving on carefully timed schedules to cut exposure to airstrikes. Railway workers turned into unsung heroes, keeping the lines running even when stray shells hit nearby tracks. Military and civilian hospitals operate on permanent alert. Armored ambulances run constant rotations, bringing back the wounded from the front lines and carrying medical supplies forward. Pokrovsk's central hospital has turned into a hybrid facility, juggling both civilian and military patients in a complex dance of medical priorities. Fuel and ammo depots were spread out and buried at multiple sites around the city. This decentralization, though less efficient, proved crucial for keeping supplies flowing even during the heaviest shelling periods. The remaining civilian population, estimated at about 15,000 people, a quarter of the original, developed routines adapted to military reality. Markets run only at certain hours, schools were converted into shelters and distribution centers, and the night curfew is strictly enforced. But to turn a successful infiltration into a full-front breakthrough, three things are essential: width, depth, and logistical sustainment. The Russian offensive managed penetration and some depth, but failed badly at widening the bulges they'd created. Narrow bulges are inherently vulnerable because they can be hit from multiple directions at once. Like fingers sticking out from an open hand, they can be snapped off one by one if they're not backed by a wide enough base. Ukraine's response exploited this exact geometric weakness. Instead of pushing the invaders head-on, defenders focused on chewing into the flanks of the bulges, gradually cutting the supply lines of the forward groups. Logistics sustainment turned out to be the Achilles heel of the Russian operation. Keeping small, isolated groups supplied means a constant flow of ammo, food, medical gear, and communications. Every extra kilometer of advance multiplies that logistical need exponentially. Modern war doesn't forgive weak supply lines, and drone-dropped explosives made every supply truck a high-priority target. Most likely scenario: consolidation of current positions with constant pressure but no big breakthroughs. Both sides focus on a war of attrition, testing each other's logistics and morale. Russian forces will keep trying to widen existing bulges, especially toward nearby villages that could serve as more solid footholds. The goal will be to turn spot infiltrations into a broader, defensible zone of control. Ukrainian forces will stick to their pincer strategy, looking for chances to chop off exposed bulges while tightening defenses around the critical routes. Escalation scenario: prolonged interdiction of one of the main highways, forcing major logistical detours that could trigger tactical withdrawals to more defensible positions. Ukrainian opportunity scenario: a successful localized counteroffensive that completely wipes out one or more Russian bulges, temporarily restoring security to the supply routes. But remember, behind all the tactical analysis and colorful maps, there's a brutal human reality. Soldiers on both sides work endless shifts with limited rotation and constant psychological stress. For Ukrainian forces, the burden of keeping Pokrovsk running is heavy. Every extra day of resistance saves lives and preserves military capacity, but the toll in exhaustion and casualties keeps piling up. On the Russian side, the pressure for tangible results is growing. Costly infiltrations that don't turn into permanent territorial gains spark doubts about tactical effectiveness and resource use. Modern war is as much a test of tech and strategy as it is of basic human endurance, the ability to keep functioning when every single day brings new lethal risks. Medical logistics support became a crucial factor. Rapid evacuation of the wounded doesn't just save lives, it keeps unit morale alive. Pokrovsk serves as a critical triage point where life and death calls get made in minutes. Pokrovsk is still the beating logistical heart of northern Donetsk, but that heart is under dangerously high blood pressure. What we've seen over the past weeks wasn't the endgame, but a crucial round that exposed both sides' strengths and weaknesses. The Russian infiltration showed impressive tactical skill, but also revealed the limits of turning penetration into lasting control. Ukraine's response showed preparation, speed, and effectiveness in crisis containment, but also highlighted how dependent the entire regional military operation is on this single city. The fundamental question remains: will constant pressure eventually choke Pokrovsk's arteries, or will Ukraine's elastic defense prove resilient enough to keep the heart beating? If you made it this far, drop in the comments. Do you believe Pokrovsk will hold out for the next 30 days, or are we witnessing the beginning of the end of Ukrainian control over this crucial logistics hub?